Dikker Vata spoilers. For August 2026, the month the dynasty began to crumble, the heat of August settled over the Platland like a blanket woven from secrets, each thread pulled taut by the weight of what could no longer remain hidden. This was the month when the Unal dynasty, that grand fortress of family pride and carefully maintained appearances, finally began to show its cracks, and through those cracks poured a flood of revelations that would leave no one standing on dry ground. Pembe had spent decades building her kingdom on the foundation of control, and she was not about to watch it collapse without a fight. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. From the moment Omer discovered that Metehan had fallen for Azra, a woman 20 years his senior, it became painfully clear that the younger generation was writing its own rules, and those rules had nothing to do with tradition, propriety, or their matriarch's carefully laid plans. Nursema, still reeling from the wreckage of her forced marriage, and the subsequent unraveling of her relationship with Umut, found herself drowning in the suffocating silence of a husband whose depression had become a permanent resident in their home. She complained to Doga, seeking solace in the only sister who understood the weight of carrying a marriage that felt more like a prison than a partnership. But when Nursema threw Umut a surprise party, a desperate attempt to reignite the spark that had once burned so brightly between them, his reaction was not the grateful embrace she had hoped for. It was cold, distant, and devastating. The party was meant to be a declaration of love. Instead, it became an announcement of just how far apart they had drifted. Meanwhile, Pembe, ever the strategist, had already moved on to her next project. With Doga finally out of the picture, or so she believed, the matriarch set her sights on securing Fatih's future with Gorkem, a woman she deemed suitable, respectable, and most importantly, controllable. Plans were laid for a wedding proposal on Fatih's behalf, and Pembe allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, believing she had finally restored order to her chaotic family. But satisfaction, as it so often does in the world of Dikker Vata, proved to be nothing more than the calm before the storm. Shocking news arrived before any celebration could take place. Gorkem's father, a man who clearly understood the value of protecting his daughter's future, demanded she cut ties with Fatih immediately. Pembe, refusing to accept defeat, begged them to reconsider, her desperation laid bare for all to see. But the damage was done, and the cracks in her carefully constructed facade were growing wider by the day. Cimen, meanwhile, found herself entangled in her own web of deception. She began to wonder why Gokhan was avoiding her, and the answer she uncovered was enough to shatter any illusions she had held about love, loyalty, and the men who claimed to offer both. Gokhan was not the bachelor he had pretended to be. He was a married man with 2 children, and Cimen was nothing more than a secret he had been keeping from the world. The betrayal cut deep, but Cimen, ever the survivor, was not about to let this revelation destroy her. Instead, she made a choice that would send shockwaves through both families. Pembe, determined to maintain control, turned her attention to Alev, who had become the embodiment of everything she feared most. Alev was pregnant with Abdullah's child, a living, breathing reminder of her husband's betrayal. Pembe offered Alev money to get an abortion, the cold calculation of her offer revealing just how far she was willing to go to protect her dynasty. But Alev, who had sacrificed so much already, was not about to be bought off so easily. She refused, choosing instead to raise the baby alone, and in doing so declared herself a force that Pembe could not simply wish away. The revelation of Cimen's involvement with Gokhan's married brother sent ripples through the family. Cimen, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage of her heart, told Doga the truth, and Doga in turn found herself caught between loyalty to her sister and the growing realization that her own marriage was disintegrating before her eyes. Doga told Fatih she still loved him, that she wanted to save their marriage, but the words felt hollow, a desperate attempt to reclaim something that had already slipped through her fingers. Abdullah, the patriarch who had watched his family implode from the inside, begged Alev for another chance. But she refused, her resolve as unyielding as the walls Pembe had built around her heart. Alev was done being anyone's second choice, done being the woman who waited in the shadows while others claimed the spotlight. She chose herself, and in doing so, became a threat Pembe could not control. The tension reached a fever pitch when Cimen arrived at Kıvılcım's house wearing a hijab, her appearance a statement of defiance and commitment. She announced her marriage to Gokhan, and the fallout was immediate and brutal. Kıvılcım, who had always believed in doing things properly, was infuriated by the impetuousness of her sister's decision. But Cimen was beyond caring about propriety. She was fighting for her future, and she would not let anyone stand in her way. Fatih, struggling to make sense of his own fractured life, was upset to see Cimen at Gorkem's family iftar. The sight of her, so integrated into the family that had rejected him, was a bitter pill to swallow. But his pain was nothing compared to the storm brewing on the horizon. Ertugrul attacked Ceyhan at Abdullah's office, the violence a testament to the depths of his anger and betrayal. He then told Omer that he and Mihri were moving to London, a decision that would sever ties with the family forever. Umut, in a moment of clarity, asked Nursema to start fresh in a small family house. The gesture was a peace offering, a chance to rebuild what had been broken, but Nursema, who had been burned so many times before, remained cautious. She knew that love could not be bought with promises, it had to be earned through action. And as the days passed, it became clear that Umut was struggling to deliver on his promises, his depression a weight that neither of them could carry alone. Gorkem, desperate to understand why her own future had been so cruelly taken away, blamed Doga for Fatih's cheating. The accusation was a knife twist, a reminder that no one in this family was innocent, and that the sins of one often became the burden of all. And then came the decision that would change everything. Alev arrived at Abdullah's house with a suitcase, ready to move in as a second wife. Her arrival was a declaration of war, a challenge to Pembe's authority that could not be ignored. She caused chaos by asking for breakfast in her room, the audacity of the request a calculated provocation. Pembe, who had spent her life building a fortress of respectability, was now forced to share her home, and her husband, with the woman who represented everything she despised. Ruzgar, ever the voice of reason, convinced Nursema to keep her career, a decision that would give her the independence she so desperately needed. But Nursema and Umut decided not to move, their marriage still fragile, still teetering on the edge of collapse. Abdullah, growing increasingly frustrated, tried once again to convince Pembe to grant him a divorce. She refused, her pride a shield against the humiliation that threatened to consume her. Nursema and Umut reconciled, a flicker of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. But when Umut sang in the bar while Nursema chatted with Ruzgar, the seeds of jealousy were sown once again. Alev, scrolling through social media, saw a photo of Abdullah, Omer, and Metehan out and about, the image a painful reminder of the life she had been denied. And then came the moment that would push everything over the edge. Pembe fell down the stairs during a fierce argument with Alev. The fall was brutal, the impact a physical manifestation of the emotional damage that had been building for months. Nilay, ever the opportunist, convinced Mustafa to blame Alev, setting in motion a chain of events that would have devastating consequences. Pembe was injured, her body battered, but her spirit remained unbroken. She was still the matriarch, still the woman who had built this dynasty, and she would not be defeated so easily. Abdullah, enraged by the chaos Alev had brought into his home, finally ended things with her. It was a decision born of frustration and exhaustion, a recognition that the price of his love was simply too high. But Omer, ever the pragmatist, warned him that a pregnant Alev might fight him in court. The threat was a ghost that would not be easily exorcised. As August drew to a close, the Unal family stood on the brink of collapse. Pembe was injured and furious, Abdullah was fractured and alone, and the children were scattered, each fighting their own battles in a war that seemed impossible to win. The dynasty that had once seemed so indestructible was now a house of cards, and the slightest breeze threatened to bring it all crashing down. But perhaps the most devastating question of all remained unanswered. How long could this family survive when every secret was a weapon, and every revelation a wound that refused to heal? The answer, like so much in Dikker, was still to come. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. What do you think will happen next? Will Alev take Abdullah to court for custody of the baby? Will Umut and Nursema survive this latest crisis? Will Pembe ever recover from her injuries? Or her broken heart? Drop your predictions in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment of the drama. This is Dikker Asks Fatih, where every episode is a revelation, and every revelation changes everything.